Center for Church in Prison helps ex-offenders build a new life in the community, along with campaigning for change in criminal justice. And to tell us about some events planned in that direction is the founder of the center, Reverend George Walters-Sleyon. Thank you very much for being with us, Reverend.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
One of the things you're working on is getting more attention now. There's more momentum for change, and that's in incarceration. And you have an event planned about that in September.
Yes. First of all, it's quite a pleasure being on the program again, Chris. So good to see you. But we are quite excited because over the years, we've been talking about criminal justice reform, the implications and cumulative consequences of mass incarceration. And so we're quite excited that it has now caught up with the public. And mass incarceration, criminal justice reform seems to be on the agenda of every politician. And in most table conversation, it's on the table. People are talking about it, which is very encouraging because people are beginning to look at the pros and cons of incarcerating people for a longer time and the difficulty for those people to reintegrate into society and the cumulative consequences that those people face existentially, economic, political, social. So people are beginning to say, look, how long will we go on in incarcerating people for such a long time without looking at alternatives, viable strategic alternatives to mass incarceration? So we're quite excited when we're doing this conference from September 10th to the 12th in Boston here. It's called 2015 Conference on Ending Mass Incarceration and the School to Prison Pipeline, under the theme, mass educate, don't mass incarcerate.
So Reverend, back to the prison pipeline, how does the conference in September plan to address that?
Okay, so like I said earlier, we are quite excited about this conference again. The need for criminal justice reform has become a major agenda a major item on the agenda of most politicians across the country. Recently, Obama gave a major speech at the NAACP 106th conference or convention in Philadelphia. And he talked extensively about criminal justice reform. And so we're quite excited about this. This conference looks specifically at the link between, well, it's called 2015 Conference on Ending Mass Incarceration and the School to Prison Pipeline, under the theme, mass educate, don't mass incarcerate. It looks at the link between mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. Poorly resourced schools, zero tolerance. However, in between, it looks at the element, the issues of longer sentences, mandatory minimums, and re-entry, and law enforcement, police brutality, everything that seems these days to define what law enforcement is, what criminal justice is. So on the table, we've got wonderful speakers who will be giving us a broad range of understanding, but then also looking at the possibility of providing resources, inspiration, and motivation, information to folks who want to get involved, to folks who want to have information and resources to take care of issues that they are confronted with.
Let's start with people who do serious time, maybe for some serious offenses. They coming out, you'd like to see them get a job, but you know, that's, I'm sure, going to be a problem.
Sure. People who are coming out, and in fact, it's just good you brought that question up because President Obama has now reinstated the Pell Grant, which makes it possible for those who are behind bars to get some form of formal education.
And this is for continuing into college, right? Right,
which is President Bill Clinton stopped it in 1994. And now it's been talked about. So that is a major incentive. That is a major means to reducing incarceration, because what it does is that incarceration then no longer becomes this long time of incapacitation, but it becomes a time of rehabilitation. The focus then becomes rehabilitation, adequate forms of reintegration, given the inmates the skills and the possibility for them to advance when they come out, so as to reduce recidivism. because that is the major problem. If they cannot find a job, if they are not skilled, having spent 5, 10, 15, 25 years behind bars, it makes it absolutely daunting for them to stay outside.
I want to ask you a question, and maybe this is almost what you have to answer as a person of faith. It's one thing to take somebody who's nonviolent and get them into a job when they come out, but someone who's been into serious violence, and if you're in the drug trade, you need to do that. I mean, can you really turn around people like that?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. We believe every human being is a potential candidate for transformation. Every human being is a potential candidate for redemption, no matter how hardcore the person is. However, it is important for us to be realistic. We do not support egregious crimes against other human beings. But the point here is every human being must be given a second chance. Must be given, some people will have to be given a third chance. Society normally does that, give people third chances for them to survive. So, of course, we do understand there are people who need extra time based on the crime they've committed. Okay, very wicked crimes, very terrible crimes against other human beings that need to stay behind bars for a long time. So you want to look at take for instance, what's happening in Europe. They don't have life sentences in Europe. In America, we have life sentences for the rest of your life. But in Europe, what they've been able to do is to look for alternatives to incarceration. So a person who commits a terrible murder, okay, that person can stay behind bars for 25 years, okay, and still be eligible for parole to come out. In the United States, no. So a person who commits a terrible crime against another person, we must begin to look at how this person over the years can be adequately reintegrated into the society. So for nonviolent drug offenses, whether the person is selling drugs, whether the person is using drugs, we're beginning to see that drug offenses are rehabilitated. They can be rehabilitated. The person who is a drug offender can be rehabilitated. It has a lot to do with poverty. It has a lot to do with illegal means of getting money. You see, the question then becomes, how do we stop that pipeline? You know, give the person the resources, the skills, so they can find legal means of earning some money, you see, as compared to returning to illegal means.
I want to talk to the school part of this equation because I don't think people who were 12 or 14 say, I want to be a drug dealer, forget about the education. Talk about how you get into that slippery slope and the school, that part that leads to the pipeline.
So the school to prison pipeline happens to be policies, okay? In 1971, briefly, the war on drugs was waged, okay? And so what you had was tough on crime policies that came out. And then you had policies like zero tolerance policies, where if a person was caught with a certain amount of drugs, everything was taken away from the person. It was a tough on crime policy. What then began to happen was that the whole focus on tough on crime and zero tolerance policies with respect to drugs declined around 1990, 1995. But what began to happen was that zero tolerance policies began to be adopted in the public school system across the country. Tough on crime because they felt that students were bringing drugs into school, were bringing guns into school. Research did prove that students know there was a lesser amount of students bringing guns into school, lesser amount of students bringing drugs into school. So what began to happen was that students were expelled, students were suspended for long term, simply for tardiness, simply for, take for instance, a student taking another student chicken nuggets from them. That child was basically suspended for a long time, eventually expelled, or police was called. You see, then what you began to see was more police presence in the school, okay, surveillance cameras in schools, strip searches in schools, metal detectors in public schools. These basically then transform the environment, the educational environment, into a criminal-oriented environment. And so then with zero tolerance policies, students were disciplined harshly, easily expelled, Okay, and what began to happen was that the pipeline began because these students were immediately at early stages introduced into the criminal justice system.
Reverend, we should close by mentioning two things coming up here. In addition to the date and the place of the conference, you have a rally about this very issue on Wednesday.
So we have a rally against the school-to-prison pipeline on Wednesday, the 19th at 12 p.m. on the steps of the Massachusetts State House. And we want you to come with your placards if you understand the situation. If you don't understand the situation, come on. We'll show you what issue. We'll give you the information as well. But and then also on the 10th to the 19th, the 12th of September, we're having our conference, Ending Mass Incarceration and the School-to-Prison Pipeline, under the theme, Mass Educate, Don't Mass Incarcerate. We feel education is a right. Education is not a privilege, it's a right.
Thank you very much for being with us. Reverend George Walters-Sleyon from the Center for Church in Prison. We'll have more news in just a moment.